Why an 85-year-old man remains happy even though his children don't visit. That is the question at the heart of our debate today. Welcome. Today we are confronting a silence that is frankly deafening. We are looking at a deeply personal monologue from a man named Harold, or Harl as he prefers to go by. At 85 years old, Harl poses a question that I think haunts thousands of households across the country. He asks, "What is the loudest sound in the world?" And his answer isn't a scream or an explosion. It is the silence of his phone, which hasn't rung in 3 months.
Yeah, it is a profoundly painful starting point for a narrative. You have this man, Harold, who feels he has given absolutely everything. He talks about giving his money, his back, his knees, all to raise 3 children, who now offer him at best, a generic text message on Christmas.
Exactly. But the core of our discussion today isn't just about the tragedy of that silence. We really want to hone in on the core question of the text. Why did this happen to the character in the story? Are we looking at a father reclaiming his dignity from ungrateful kids by learning to stop, quote, chasing them? Or, and I suspect this is where you're going to land, is there something in Harold's own philosophy of parenting that actually sowed the seeds of this isolation?
You called it. That is exactly where I stand. I mean, Harold's narrative reveals this highly transactional view of relationships that explains the estrangement far better than just saying his kids got busy or selfish. Though I know you view his recent transformation, his decision to build a garden, as he puts it, as this heroic answer.
I absolutely do. I'll be arguing that Harold's estrangement was perpetuated by a total loss of respect. He essentially became a beggar in his own family. And the only way to fix that, why the reason this is happening, is to change the power dynamic completely.
And I will argue that while his solution creates some peace for him personally, it totally ignores the root cause. The silence exists because of an unaddressed history and a contractual mindset that he is unfortunately reinforcing rather than dismantling.
Well, let's get right into the position statements. Then I want to lay out why I believe Harold's diagnosis of his own problem is actually spot on. When we ask, why did this happen to this character? Harold identifies a specific behavioral loop that I think is undeniable. He admits to calling his kids 5 times a week, leaving voicemails, and essentially, as he puts it so brutally, begging for a crumb.
He calls it the chase.
The chase, right? And this explains the why perfectly. When a parent positions themselves as the old dog waiting by the window, again, Harold's own words, they cease to be a figure of respect or even affection. They become a burden. They become an obligation. Harold rightly identifies that begging for love ain't love. That's pity. The reason the estrangement deepened is that he suffocated his children with his own neediness. The children aren't necessarily villains in this scenario. They are reacting to pressure. When someone chases you constantly, the natural human instinct is to run away. Harold's realization is that he surrendered his dignity. The silence happened because he made himself small. Therefore, his solution to stop the bleeding, to reclaim his independence, is the only logical path to restoring equilibrium.
He is stating facts. He provided for them.
Okay, that is a crucial distinction. A cow eating grass in the sun has a completely different fatty acid profile than a cow eating corn in a feedlot. Grass-fed beef is higher in omega-3s and CLA, which are anti-inflammatory. Grain-fed beef is essentially a bomb of pro-inflammatory omega-6s. So, sure, if Hattie is eating high-quality, pasture-raised animals, she is mitigating some of the risk. But I still can't sign off on the bacon grease. That is pure saturated fat.
He is stating a ledger. This is the transactional view of parenting I mentioned. The reason this happened to Harold isn't just because he's annoying on the phone, it's because he views his relationship with his children as a debt that they are currently failing to repay. When he says, "I spoon-fed you," he is implying, "You owe me." Children sense that they don't run from love, they run from debt collectors. And I think Harold, despite his newfound hobbies and independence, is still missing the dark heart of the issue here. He glosses over the past by saying, maybe I was too hard on him, and then decides that because he kept the lights on, he is completely absolved. The estrangement is likely a reaction to unaddressed emotional history, not just present-day neediness.
I think you are being incredibly uncharitable to a man of his generation. But let's move into the core debate. I want to drill down on your point about the ledger in a minute, but first we have to address the mechanism of the interaction itself. Let's look at point 1, the mechanic of the chase versus the guilt trip.
Go ahead.
Harold describes a very specific, painful scenario. He calls 5 times a week. He sounds sad. He sounds lonely. He says, "You teaching them that you are burden. You teaching them you ain't got no life." This is a profound insight for an 85-year-old man. He realizes that he has made himself into a source of negative emotion. The why here is immediate and visceral. If every time your phone rings, it's a demand to soothe a lonely parent, you stop answering. It's not about some deep, dark past trauma. It's about the present pressure. But he also uses the phrase guilt trips. He explicitly says, when the guilt trips stop, they start wondering. This implies that prior to the silence, he was actively using guilt as a weapon to get them to interact with him.
Or he was just expressing legitimate sorrow.
Calling and saying, "Just checking in on you, call daddy back," repeated 5 times a week, isn't just checking in. It's weaponized sadness. My point is, the silence is a protective measure by the kids. The children aren't ignoring him because they forgot he exists, which is Harold's ultimate fear. They are ignoring him because interaction with him is emotionally expensive. Harold says, if you got to remind your child that you exist, they already forgot you. You probably see that as a hard truth.
I absolutely do. It's a brutal truth that cuts right through his denial.
See, I see it as a pessimistic, absolute conclusion that protects him from self-reflection. Maybe they didn't forget him at all. Maybe they are hiding from him. There's a massive difference there. If they forgot him, he is a victim of time and busy lives. If they are hiding from him, he is the architect of his own isolation.
I really don't think he's protecting himself from self-reflection. The man explicitly says in the text, "I wasn't perfect, I made mistakes." But, and this leads perfectly to our second point, he decides to stop wallowing in that past and build the garden. This is the pivot of the entire piece. This is his cure.
Ah, the garden.
Yes, the garden. He stops the calls. He joins a woodshop class. He plays chess in the park. He cooks gumbo. He argues that by filling the hole in his chest himself, he becomes interesting again. This solves the why of the estrangement. By removing the dependency completely, he is no longer a vampire feeding on their attention. He is a man making a table. He creates attraction rather than obligation. He says, if you build a beautiful garden, the butterfly comes to you. That is a deeply beautiful, healthy metaphor.
It is a beautiful metaphor, sure, and I am genuinely glad he is playing chess and eating gumbo. It is certainly better than staring at the ceiling, waiting for the phone to ring. But let's look at the underlying motivation here. Is he building the garden because he actually wants to be happy? Or is this just a new, more sophisticated tactic to catch the butterflies?
Does it really matter if the result is that he's happy and independent?
It matters for the relationship. He says eventually they call. He is still looking for the payoff. But more importantly, look at how he frames the sudden change. He says, stop the bleeding. He says, kill that guilt. This sounds like survival mode, not actual repair. He is cauterizing a wound. If he kills the guilt regarding mistakes he made 30 years ago, without actually resolving those mistakes with his children, he isn't fixing the bridge. He is building a fortress.
But you can't fix the bridge if the other side isn't willing to walk on it. That's his entire point. He can't force his kids to have that conversation. He can't force them to accept an apology. So he has to build the garden for himself. You call it a fortress. I call it a sanctuary. He says, I stop needing them to fill this hole. That is the very definition of mental health and boundary setting.
Decides, I'm done apologizing. I'm going to go make a table. He is effectively saying, I am choosing my peace over the messy, painful work of digging into why you are actually mad at me.
Which brings us to arguably the most controversial part of his monologue, the contract.
The contract. Yes. This is where I think Harold gives the whole game away.
I disagree completely. I think he is setting a completely necessary boundary. Let's look at the text. He says, I was there. I didn't run off. I put food on that table. I kept the lights on. He argues that if his children are punishing him today for something from 30 years ago, that's on them. He says, the contract is done. I stand with Harold here. A parent's job is to raise the child, keep them safe, and launch them into the world. He did that. He shouldn't have to apologize forever for just being human and making mistakes.
But contract is a business term. Relationships defined by contracts end when the contract is done. If Harold views his parenthood as a completed job, I did my job, the contract is done, then he unknowingly explains exactly why the connection is severed. You don't hang out with your contractor after the house is built.
That is just a semantic argument. He clearly means the obligation is done.
Words matter, especially in a narrative like this. He lists his contributions like line items on an invoice. Fancy college. My knees. He feels he paid his dues and is now owed a return on his investment, which in this case is attention and gratitude. The dissenter in me argues that the children sense this exact entitlement. They feel that their father doesn't want to know them as people. He wants to collect his Christmas text dividend.
I really think you are pathologizing a man who is simply hurt. He feels he gave his life for them, which he did, literally, physically, and they have discarded him. When he says the contract is done, he is giving himself permission to stop feeling guilty for not being perfect. He says, you can't pay for the past with your dignity today. That is an incredibly powerful statement. He is refusing to be held hostage by his past shortcomings.
Or he is refusing to be held accountable. He dismisses the children's grievances as just holding a grudge. He says, that's a heavy bag to carry. Let them carry it. That is a flat-out refusal to engage with their reality. If my father told me, I kept the lights on, so stop complaining about how I treated you emotionally, I wouldn't visit either. That's the tragedy here. He thinks the why is that he wasn't interesting enough, or he called too much, I think the why is that he never validated their feelings.
And yet, we arrive at the conclusion of his story, and the shift in power dynamics is undeniable. We move to our fourth point, acceptance and the unlocked door.
Right? The ending.
Harold admits sometimes the butterflies still don't come. He doesn't promise his garden is some magic trick that works every time. He says sometimes folks are just selfish. But his response to that is what fascinates me. He says, "I'm going to eat a good steak tonight. I'm going to live." He says, "The door is unlocked, but I ain't standing in the doorway waiting no more." This answers the question of why did this happen with a resounding, "It doesn't matter anymore." He has reclaimed his life.
It is a powerful move. I agree. I ain't standing in the doorway is a reclaiming of self. But it is also deeply sad. The unlocked door is a passive stance. It puts the onus entirely on the children to return.
Because they are the ones who left.
But if they left because they were hurt, and he is sitting inside eating his steak saying, "I'm done apologizing," they will never walk through that door. The unlocked door is essentially an ultimatum disguised as an invitation. It says, "Come back on my terms," or "Don't come back at all." I strongly disagree with that reading. I think it says, "I love you, but I love myself enough not to be destroyed by you." He says, "Refuse to let their absence destroy you." That isn't arrogance, that's survival. If the alternative is dying of a broken heart in a dark room, then eating the steak is the heroic choice.
It is the survival choice. I won't deny that. But we are analysing why the estrangement happened to this character. And my fear is that Harold's solution, this radical independence, confirms to his children that they were never really needed as people, only as audience members for his contract. He creates a life where he doesn't need them, and while that stops the pain, it also cements the distance.
But what is the alternative here? To keep calling? To keep begging?
No, the alternative would be to say, "I am sorry for the past. I am listening. I am not done parenting you." Not in a contractual way, but in an emotional way.
But Harold is 85, and perhaps he just doesn't have the energy for that kind of emotional labor. Or perhaps he tried and it wasn't enough. We have to look at the text fairly. He says, "I loved them the best way I knew how." At some point, that has to be enough.
The best way I knew how is possibly the saddest phrase in the English language. It implies limitation. It admits that the tools he had weren't the tools that were needed.
Well, let's bring this to a close. We've looked at the silence, the chase, the garden, and the contract. As we wrap up, how do you summarize your position on why this happened to Harold?
I look at this story, and I see a tragedy of miscommunication. I believe the estrangement stems from Harold's view of parenting as a series of transactions. College paid, knees given, contract done. The children likely felt the weight of that ledger and the lack of emotional attunement. While Harold's garden is a necessary sanctuary for his own mental health, it risks becoming a fortress that keeps the children out permanently. He has solved the pain of the silence, but he hasn't solved the cause of the silence.
And for me, the estrangement occurred because Harold lost the power dynamic in the relationship. He allowed his love to turn into desperation. The why is simply that he became a burden by chasing. His pivot, his garden, is the solution. By reclaiming his dignity, by joining the woodshop and making the gumbo, he isn't just surviving. He is teaching his children that he is a whole person. He is refusing to let the silence be the end of his story. It is a triumph of the human spirit over loneliness.
It's certainly a complex reality.
It is, The silence of that phone is indeed the loudest sound in the world. And whether you see Harold as a man building a garden or a man fortifying a castle, the lesson remains. We cannot control how others love us. We can only control how we live.
That's right. It leaves us asking, are we chasing butterflies or are we building a place where they might want to land? And if they don't land, can we still enjoy the garden?
That is the ultimate question. Thank you for listening to the debate. Until next time.